to the star map.
Oh, I'd love to,
That was a piece of scientific evidence that my dear friend, colleague, and co-author, Stanton Friedman, investigated.
Okay.
And went into the room that Barney was in to examine him.
Mm-hmm.
Betty was left alone with the one that they called the leader. We now know that it's not really the leader, it's a communicator, it's an escort, it's the non-human entity that stays with the abductee and makes them feel comfortable and calm. But Betty had lost her fear of him because he took her pain away. And she said to him, "Well, I know you're not from around here. Where's your home port?" And he produced a 3-dimensional model of a star map. And 2 stars in the foreground were as large as nickels. They were connected by 5 solid lines. And then there were some the size of dots. And so some were connected by solid lines, some by dotted lines. He made her understand that the ones connected by solid lines were trade routes, whereas the dotted lines represented expeditions. And so, bet where you are on this map. And she said, "No, I don't know where I am. I know nothing about the universe." And he said to her, "If you don't know where you are, how can I tell you where I am?" Which is, to me, kind of deceptive, because he certainly could have stated where he was from. But I suppose it had a different name than what our astronomers have named it.
And this is when I saw the star map. It looked almost like I was looking out a window. It had dimension to it. It was about 3 or 4 feet long and about 2 feet high. There were all these balls of light in it. And the leader explained to me that the heavy lines were places they go all the time or frequently. The broken lines were expeditions. He asked me if I knew where I was on the map. And I told him no, that I knew nothing about astronomy. And so he said if I did not know where I was on the map, then there was no point of trying to explain it to me. I just didn't have the necessary knowledge.
That map was in the first book that was ever written about the Hills case, but it is also in Captured, the Betty and Barney Hill UFO experience that Stanton Friedman and I wrote. He wrote the 2 chapters on the star map, in fact. And Marjorie Fish, a brilliant school teacher from Ohio, saw it. And she was an amateur astronomer. She was also a member of Mensa, meaning that her IQ was at least 140. Yeah. So she thought that she might be able to identify what part of our solar system this group of non-humans came from. At first, she thought she'd find many matches. But by 1971, she hadn't found one match, even though she had built 23 models out 55 light years in every direction from our sun. And you remember there weren't any computers then, at least not home computers. She had to go to the university and sit there and take the astronomical catalogs and copy the distance data. And not only that, the characteristics of all of those stars, the sizes of all of those stars. And then she had to go home and do the math to know exactly where to place them in our local galactic neighborhood out 55 light years. It was an extraordinary undertaking, and I can't imagine how frustrated she must have been after doing all of that work and still not finding a match. But then a new catalog was released, And she went to the university and found that catalog in 1971. It had new distance data, and there were 3 new stars that had not been within 55 light years of our sun. She did some rearranging. She put in those new stars, and voila, she had a match for Betty's map. Well, then how was she going to get scientists to vet her work? She didn't know any scientists. So she went to Coral Lorenzen, who was the co-director of APRO. And this was a UFO group. And Stanton Friedman happened to be a member of that group. Okay. And so she called Stanton and asked him if when he was in Ohio, he would stop by and speak with Marjorie and look at her star map work.
Because of the peculiar spacing of the stars near the sun, it was impossible for Marjorie Fish to find a match of more than 4 or 5 of the 12 patterned stars in the star map. Then she began to focus on the stars that were most like the sun and most likely to have planets and life.
Finally, only the very best stars for life were left. When that happened, I had a 9-point match. A very exciting thing for me.
The 15-point match achieved by Marjorie Fish of the Betty Hill star map is unique and goes far beyond the laws of chance.
Despite the fact that Marjorie Fish tried thousands of different combinations of stars to try to match Betty's pattern, she was able to find one and only one pattern that matched angle for angle, line length for line length, what Betty had drawn. The star pattern makes sense from nearest star to nearest star to nearest star. The sun is part of the pattern. Quite remarkably, every one of the stars in the pattern is the right kind for planets and life. And all of the right kind of stars for planets and life in this volume of space are part of the pattern. The chance of that happening by accident, all the right kind and only the right kind for patterned stars, is 1 in several thousand. Perhaps most remarkably, this work tells us where one set of visitors originates. The base stars, Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 Reticuli, are a very special pair of stars.
Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 Reticuli are the closest to each other pair of stars suitable for planets and life in our entire neighborhood. Instead of being isolated from their neighbors as we are, Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 are 100 times closer to each other than we are to our nearest neighbor. It would not be surprising if space travel developed earlier between such close neighbors. Zeta 1 and 2 Reticuli are over 1 billion years older than Earth, clearly giving any beings living there a long evolutionary head start on us.
Opportunity to be in Ohio, he met with Marjorie, and he was very impressed by her. He said that he thought she would be much more capable and comfortable talking to scientists than to members of the general public. He then found 3 scientists who were willing to vet Marjorie's work. One was Dr. Alan Hynek. He was at that point the director of the astronomy department and the observatory at Northwestern University. He had been the astronomical consultant to Project Blue Book for all of the years that it was open. And during that time, he was debunking UFOs. But over that time frame, he was able to get a look at the very good evidence we had that UFOs are real. And so he vetted Marjorie's work, and he stated that it was accurate. Also, in that same time frame, Dr. David Saunders, who was one of the scientific investigators on the scientific study of UFOs done in Colorado and headed up by Dr. Edward Condon. So he was one of those scientists. He got himself into trouble when he found a memo, and that memo was the trick memo that was the plan to make the public believe that this was really a scientific study. When all scientists involved, they figured they wouldn't find a UFO. So that was revealed by Dr. Saunders, and he was kicked off the program.
Really? Wow.
Yes. But he was being honest.
Right.
And he was a statistician. Mm-hmm. And so he did a statistical analysis on Marjorie's work based upon the location of those stars on the map and how close they were to line length for line length to what Betty sketched, angle for angle. Betty's map was nearly accurate, but there were a couple of lines that were different, and those were the two lines that were connecting the larger stars on that map. Mm-hmm. Well, those were the home base of these entities. They were identified by Marjorie as Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2. And so Dr. Saunders said, if all of the stars on Betty's map were precisely the line length for line length, angle for angle for Marjorie's map, the chance of that happening simply by coincidence would be 1 in a million. Mm-hmm. But now it was something like 1 in 100,000. Mm-hmm. That it could be 1 in 10,000. My memory is a little fuzzy on that. Mm-hmm. Stanton could reel it right up easily.
But either way, significant in so many aspects, and there's so many layers there for being
absolutely and
manually doing that.
There was a computer model generated eventually by the astronomy department at Ohio State University, and they too said that Marjorie's work was accurate. Now, the important things about the stars on Betty's map are that all 12 of the stars connected by lines on Betty's map were sun-like stars, even though only 5% of the stars in our local galactic neighborhood are sun-like. All of the stars on Betty's map were sun-like. What a coincidence that was.
Right.
And something else that Stanton wanted to point out was that all of those stars were in a plane. And the comparison he used is that they were like pepperoni on a pizza, as opposed to raisins widely dispersed in a loaf of raisin bread, meaning that it would be easier to travel scientifically from one solar system or to another, assuming that there is a solar system. We know there are stars. It made sense that is how a civilization who developed the technology to travel in space would travel, and possibly set up an outpost on a planet in another star system before they would move on to the next star system out. So, we know that's theoretically possible, and now scientists need to do their work, and they're working on it a little bit at a time. You have to realize we're very primitive compared to this advanced civilization. And eventually we will know if there are planets around Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2. I have the letter that a scientist wrote to Stanton. This was an astronomer, wrote to Stanton, saying that even though Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2 are in a binary star system, they are far enough apart that they could host planets in a stable orbit. So we know that is theoretically possible. I just hope that I'm still alive to know the answer to this question. Unfortunately, Stanton didn't live long enough.
Right.
to know the answer.
Of course. All aspects that ring true for that just being somebody with a dreamlike stake or just having a fanciful imagination. There are just too many points that connect. I mean, no pun intended, but that makes sense in, like, how can you make that up? You just can't. It takes me back to some of the ancient civilizations where I think one was in Western Mali, the Dogon tribe, who came up with serious A&D, and they had nothing technology-wise about. I think even to this day they still live rooted to the way of old. And they said that this knowledge was given to them. We can go on and on. The Hopi Indian, everybody has a story in the ancient cultures or ancient civilizations of knowledge being brought to them from either the stars or the heavens. And when finally, I think technology, they're again associated with their map. It wasn't until the 70s to where they were able to pinpoint and navigate to say, like, oh my God, how did they know this? Where did they, you have to, at some point in time, like, when do you just, want to acknowledge certain truths? Like, if that's what they're saying it is, and that map is that accurate, then there's truth to that.
Yes. Hopefully your readers can see that.
Okay.
This is just a photocopy of the star map and the information that I was able to find during my investigation of this, because Stanton was the expert on this. But, they're sun-like stars, and Zeta Reticuli 1 and Zeta Reticuli 2. On 1, 93% the solar mass, 91% the diameter of our sun, 79% the luminosity of our sun. And Zeta Reticuli 2, 99% the diameter of our sun, 102% the luminosity. They're only like 39.4 light years away and 39.5 light years away from us. If you were to send a space telescope out to the edge of our solar system, you could probably get a pretty good look if you had a powerful enough telescope to determine whether or not there are any planets around those stars. So that's what I'm waiting for.
Right. And that's going to come.
We went to Ohio State University to get an expert opinion about the validity of Marjorie Fish's star map work. Professor Walter Mitchell has been a professional astronomer for over 20 years.
It took me quite a long time to gain a full appreciation for the work of Marjorie Fish, but it's become apparent over the years that, first of all, the work is, without question, accurate.
The proven validity of her star map enormously increases the credibility of the remainder of Mrs. Hill's story.